everyone, Lapsus here. I'm here with another episode of the SkidCities devblog. So this has been a really productive 10 days of development. Let's jump into it. So today I'm going to talk about three things that I've done. The Wasteland, which I'm really excited about. I completely changed the UI color using Figma, and I'll show you how. And then I started to work on a new mechanic that is Utopia against Dystopia that I'm really excited about as well. Let's start with the Wasteland. So basic idea is that in your city, your factories will produce waste, toxic waste that, after some time you will need to get rid of. And I wanted to have a wasteland territory that you can define in your city and that you can expand or decrease over time. And so to do that, I use the same approach that I use for roads and sewers, which is every piece of your wasteland in this case is aware of the surrounding pieces and it auto adjusts. And what that means is that you need to create a bunch of models in order for the final effect to be something like what you're seeing here for wasteland. But if you think about it, it's the same thing with sewers here and roads here, right? And I find this very, very satisfying, and so I wanted another building to have that feeling. And so to do that, I started to map it out, but I realized that compared to sewers and roads, Wasteland is a little bit different, as in like if you build just one square or two squares, they're not the same thing. Instead, like a road, if it's a lonely road, it's going to be the same as, say, a straight road. Instead of a lonely wasteland, it's just a self-contained wasteland, so it's slightly different. And so I ended up creating 4 different models, and then the way that this is done is wasteland model is actually an empty object that has the wasteland script attached to it. And then inside the empty object, you have all the possible orientation of your wasteland. So a lonely wasteland, a wasteland that is facing north, a wasteland that is facing south, and all these different combinations. And then the script attached to the wasteland is actually figuring out who's around and self-adjusting with based on that, and it's gonna enable or disable the different models based on that. And that is, it's very cool, and the way to come up with it in Blender, in my experience, is that you start with the simple one and then you create a copy of it, you place it next to your next model, and you try to have it match so that the user cannot see the seam between one part of, in this case, the wasteland, and the next, and then you remove the other one, you save it, and you move on like that. And so it took some time, but I really had a lot of fun with it. And the other thing that I introduced compared to, say, roads or sewers is randomized elements. And so the idea here is that the wasteland has to variate, and so you don't want to use always the same piece of wasteland over and over again. Compare that to the road, it actually makes a lot of sense that the road is kind of consistent, and it's actually easier for you to play if the road is always the same. And so the idea here is, okay, for every piece of wasteland, I'm gonna model 4 different objects, but then I'm gonna attach a script to each object, and the script is gonna determine what is the probability that that object is actually displayed or that it's not. And that's gonna be at random. And so that's gonna create some random variations inside the wasteland, so it doesn't look like it's always the same piece, because that also doesn't give you the sensation of something very messy and full of stuff. And I had a lot of fun with it. Maybe I went too far. I added an object that is actually emitting light, and so that object itself has another script that I called fire, because I used it to simulate a fire, but I started to use it also to simulate unstable lights. And so what the script is doing is basically grabbing the light object connected to the object that is attached to, and then it's at random increasing or decreasing the intensity at random intervals. And so I find this script very useful to simulate how a fire works, because the fire sometimes has a spark or something like that, and so it's all of a sudden for a split second the intensity of the fire is higher. That's what I initially wrote the script for, but then I realized that I can use it also to simulate the light generated by a huge screen. When you're looking at a huge screen, there's a dark scene, a light scene, the light changes, and I can also use it to simulate a broken screen, in this case, in the wasteland. And so that's how it looks, and sometimes it spawns, sometimes it not, based on the randomness. Okay, so this was the Wasteland. I was really excited about it. I think it's a little bit too dark, so I may change the underlying texture to be a little bit lighter, because right now it's very, very dark, but overall I was really excited about it. So this was the Wasteland. Second thing is the UI. So I haven't seen a lot of tutorials on YouTube about how to use Figma for your game UI, and I'm by far not the best at designing UIs, but I can tell you that it was very useful for me to use Figma, and specifically to use theme colors inside Figma. So if you've seen my previous videos, you've seen that the UI was looking, had this light blue and yellow tones, and that was okay, but I didn't like it. And so the cool thing is that my UI is composed by more or less 300 different pictures. All of them are PNGs, and so if I had to go back into each of them and change the coloring to each of them, I would have never iterated on this color. I would have never changed it. It just takes too much time, and as an indie developer, I don't want to waste time, right? So sometimes you either structure stuff in a way that allows you to be flexible, or you're just gonna bite the bullet and go with the first or second iteration. But in this case, I knew that I had to get the colors right, and that was gonna take some time. So what I've done is I set it up Figma so that each button is using a theme color, and what that means is that I can then change those colors once, and all of my buttons are gonna change, which is amazing. And so I iterated with a bunch of them, and finally I found this purple one for the activation, and this darker, I would say blue, for the inactive button, and that worked really, really well. I was really excited. And so the next step is simply select all of my buttons and download them, and you see I've split them in different folders, but I just copy paste them back into Unity. Unity reimports them, and boom, now I have a new UI color. So I'm really excited about this, and let me know if you're interested on this topic. I can make a separate video about how to use Figma for your in-game UI in a way that is efficient for indies. But yeah, I was really excited about being able to change the UI, and I will do more changes. So please let me know if you don't like, or if you're not extremely excited about this UI. I'll keep iterating on it. It's a huge part of the game at the end of the day. So it makes a lot of sense that I spend a bunch of time on that. And so as a bonus thing this week, I also wanted to talk about one mechanic that I introduced that is going to be, I think, more important in the future, and I just started to write it down and have something to display it, which is the utopia dystopia mechanic. And so the idea here is that depending on how you build your city, every building is going to have a utopia or dystopia value or score, and that is going to affect how your city behaves and how your building specifically behaves. And so please, the idea behind it is that dystopia is not per se negative, or utopia is not per se positive. It's just going to change your city a little bit. And so, for example, what I coded is, okay, if you have a poor residential building for workers near to a sewer or near to a wasteland, it's going to increase the dystopia factor of that building, which means the wages of those folks will be lower, which means that you're going to have a higher demand for factories in your city if you do that. And on the other end, if you build parks next to your residential buildings for workers, the utopia value is going to go up, and that means they will have higher wages, so you will get more taxes. And so you can go with either way. And so this is mainly happening behind the scenes right now, as I wanted to see in my debug log and stuff like that, how is that going to affect my city. And then I designed and coded very quickly an overall indicator that just shows you the whole city score. Is your city overall an utopia or a dystopia, and by how much? And I think that's really funny for now. It doesn't really do anything. Like if you click on it, you won't get any details. I'm gonna add more stuff later, but I have this idea that like you should be able to decide whether you wanna build a utopian or dystopian city, and you can do either way, and you just run with it. And so Please let me know what you think about this idea. I'm not sure whether to expand it or not before the early access is released, which, if everything goes right, is gonna happen next month. So stay on the lookout for that. Alright, this is it for today. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm so excited about having this initial audience of 100 people following me, so let me know how I can improve since I'm just starting out with these YouTube devlog videos. If you didn't do that already, wishlist SkidCities on Steam. Hopefully, if everything goes right, I'm a solo dev, so there's only me working on this on my spare time, but if everything goes right, the game is going out next month. In early access, and then I'll keep working on it. In the meanwhile, I'm Lapsus, keep building.